All right, hello everyone. My name is Larry Bryant. I'm the Community Engagement Manager with the ACLU of DC. And this is the first of a series of videos that we are both doing ourselves and collaborating with other organizations to help connect DC residents to not only the DC budget and its process, but how we can influence and remind our elected leaders that of their accountability, of how they're making a transparent, making the process transparent and inclusive to all community members is vital and important for all of us to be involved. Effective and meaningful engagement with DC Council members and committees can clearly help elected appointed officials be more transparent, be more accountable, and be more responsive to their respective communities. Direct engagement with council members and committees can also influence and improve governmental performance and with outcomes, along with overall transparency of the process. And clearly, the consistent and persistent messages we share with our elected leaders on how and making sure that they develop a transparent budget process and planning part of that will overall improve the government's credibility and certainly their trust within the community. So having said that, I'm going to introduce Tiana from the Fair Budget Coalition, who will talk more about the Fair Budget Coalition and how do we start with a fair budget. Tiana.
Yes, hello everyone. So my name is Tiana and I am the budget organizer with Fair Budget. So basically this presentation is an abbreviated version of kind of like our typical budget 101s, but we've also updated it for some budget engagement advice. So who is the Fair Budget Coalition? The Fair Budget Coalition is a small nonprofit organization dedicating to fighting racial inequities through local budget engagement, community building, community engagement, and information sharing. The organization has been leading advocacy since 1994 over a wide variety of social issues like housing, food access, community safety, healthcare, economic justice, fair taxes, and public deals. Now, we want to make it very clear, and this is one thing that the Fair Budget has worked with along with its members, is that the social justice issues that I just mentioned, they're not trade-offs, they're not things that we choose between. All of these things can be funded in an equitable and budget that prioritizes racial justice. So as you can see to the bottom left, you have our staff. I am the third person. You have Stephanie Sneed, who is our executive director, and Mizaki Valentine, who is the advocacy manager. And then you have some of our coalition members in this picture. And of course, ACLU DC is one of our members. And then you have a picture of some of our coalition, our constituent leaders that work with us to inform us on what's going on in their communities. So next, I'm going to give a little background on how the DC budget works and what is it. So Fair Budget likes to say that a budget is a moral document, and we got this from Martin Luther King Jr. And a budget really shows what you prioritize within a city and whose lives you prioritize, quite frankly. And a lot of people forget that or don't even know that at all. So budgets are predictions of both city spending and what the city will earn. Also, where and how the budget spends its money is a depiction on the city values. So you'll see some of the values that have been shown within the DC budget in a few seconds. So these budget decisions are mostly made for us, yet impact every section of our daily lives, from our children's schools to the foods we put in our bodies to how we travel around the city. This is why budget advocacy is essential to creating racial equity. So, and this is a little bit of knowledge, but will not shift how you do any of your budget engagement. But there is an operating side of the budget and a capital budget. And the operating side, it works with the city services, government personnel and salaries. And then the capital budget handles cities, buildings and repairs, and other roadway work and public education. So here is a breakdown of the DC budget and seeing where the money actually comes from. So a lot of the DC budget comes from local funding, and that comes from the people who live in the city and, our income taxes and all the taxes that we pay in the city that we live. So that's where a huge portion, over half of the DC budget comes from. And then there are federal grants and Medicaid that factors in, and enterprise funding. And that kind of definition and breakdown is listed below. But for the sake of this presentation, we really want to empower people and let people know that their money is going into the DC budget. And that sometimes motivates people to help engage in the budget because they want to have a say in where their money is going. Okay, next you can see here that education is a huge part of where a lot of the DC budget goes. So, and you can see that the next biggest is public works, which is human services, housing and jobs, health, and other public works. And then you see health is usually what we think of behavioral health, hospitals, and other mental health care. And then we have health and human services. So these are pieces of the pie of where most of the DC budget goes to, but within these pieces there are some more breakdowns that you can see to see kind of how everything levels out together. So in this slide, you see that education and health are a huge portion of where a lot of the spending is going. And then you see all the other places and specific things that receive money like libraries, parks, transportation, and how that compares to each other. So there's always room for advocating for more, and there's always room for seeing how what is operating and adjusting that funding. So you see education and health is a very large part, but that doesn't mean everything that's being funded in education and health is working perfectly and should continue to be funded or should be changed in order to make that money work better. So this is where your voice comes in, because if you're seeing that you've had experiences in these breakdowns and the money isn't matching or the value isn't matching for you, we want to hear your voice. Well, the council specifically wants to hear your voice at these hearings and testimonies you'll hear about, to give your experiences on what these breakdowns should look like going forward.
So to kind of restate that, it's if someone is looking at that graph and they see, like, say, housing, for example, and the money spent on that, or any of them, education, special education, et cetera, they can, by advocating and engaging in this process, they can not only help influence what that amount is, but also influence the quality of what that service or what that agency is providing.
Exactly. The more experiences that the council hears, I think that will always educate on what and how they will fund going forward and what investments are they willing to make. Many of the times, compelling testimony shows that, okay, yes, we put a lot of money in housing, but maybe the programs that we are funding aren't meeting the people's needs based on what they're talking about. So we need to have some new ideas, and those new ideas come from a lot of the DC organizations that Fair Budget works with. So it's a team effort to figure out, okay, whose organization is already doing this work and connecting those people together to come up with new programs that will better meet the people's needs.
Right.
Okay. And then the DC reserves. So we're going to talk about this just a little briefly, just because in the age of COVID-19 and the coronavirus, this has become something really important to talk about in terms of what money we're going to have to spend in this budget cycle. So DC is receiving about $495 million from the Corona Relief Fund by the federal government. And this is much less than what other states are receiving. And as many of you know, DC has a large population, and that population is just as large as a lot of states and even larger. So a lot of people want to receive, like, especially like the city of DC, we want to receive the same amount that other states are getting. So if that's an interesting point of advocacy for you, then that's something that you can definitely talk about in your stories as well, or join people who are rallying for that extra funding. But it is important to note that in DC, we have $1.4 $3 billion in reserves. And this was something that was announced by the mayor, I believe in February, before all of this broke out, that we hit that goal. So our reserves are really healthy, and we won't be talking about specific ways that the reserves are being tapped into this budget cycle, but if that's something of interest, let me know. But that money is there to use for a lot of the issues that we are experiencing in a time like this, where people are not working and cannot, pay taxes and contribute to the economy. Okay, so where are we now? So the mayor's budget projections are, pretty decent. There are some new investments that her and the mayor's budget team wants to fund, but there are also some community needs that are not being met and are being underfunded. And when it comes to addressing long-term structural inequities, the budget does not meet any of those values. It isn't really tackling why certain communities are vulnerable in DC. Black and brown communities in DC aren't vulnerable inherently. They are vulnerable because of systemic neglect. So we're waiting and we're advocating for a budget to finally address those needs. And I think in an age of COVID-19, that will be really important. So let me just list some budget priorities that Fair Budget has and that you can adopt in your storytelling or might resonate with you. So some of our budget priorities are ensuring a secure, safe, and affordable home to all. It guarantees income security for all, offering employment with living wages and hours, offers all the education and training necessary for an improved quality of life, achieves environmental justice, which both fights extreme climate change and protects neighborhoods from harmful toxins. And lastly, out of many, ensures that all the access to excellent medical care include high quality substance abuse, mental health services, and provide people with respect, honor, and dignity. So those are some of our budget priorities that I hope some of you adopt and include in your stories and testimonies. So what does that mean for actual community engagement with the budget? How will you be, letting your voice be heard during this time? So when you're testifying now, everything will be pretty much virtual and, of course, at a distance. No one will be really sitting in the council building and testifying. You will have the option of written testimony, and written testimony will clearly be typed and then later emailed. It will be emailed to the emails provided in different hearing breakdowns that are on the council website, but we will have some of that information provided to you in the next slide. And then there's live testimony. So you will have to email a few days in advance before certain deadlines to schedule a time to actually appear on Zoom in front of the council. And this means that you will have your written testimony either on hand or on your screen, and you will read that aloud to the council. And I believe it's capped around 2 to 3 minutes. So it will go by pretty fast, but again, we will be here to help you if you need that help. And then there's voicemail testimony. So this is supposed to happen over Google Voice. Each hearing will have a Google Voice number where you can call in and leave a voicemail of your testimony. But from my experience, I personally use Google Voice for a lot of things, and the voicemail transcript isn't always perfect. So I would say submit your written testimony, and also, if you would like, call in and read your testimony over the voicemail as clear as possible. But don't worry, just provide them with your name and they should be able to match your testimony with your voicemail if they try hard enough. But again, a lot of this community engagement process, if it seems difficult and it seems kind of hard to get involved, it's done like that on purpose to an extent by the council, because of course your voice and your story is important, but sometimes it's harder. The council, I would say it's harder for them to remain accountable when they receive all the stories and shortfalls that are happening within the budget. So I would say as Fair Budget and other organizations that we work with, we want to make sure that the community engagement process remains as democratic and inclusive as possible.
Mhm.
So right now what we're doing is making sure that we're aiding you all in your journey, but also trying to make this journey much easier in the future, because again, having virtual hearings and testimonies are more accessible to a lot of people. Not everyone can make it down to the Wilson building. So these options that I listed should always exist, but there is always room for improvement. And last is video testimony. The council won't be watching pre-recorded video testimony, but it could be important for social media if you want to share your testimony online to other people and tag the council members. I think once you get enough tags, they'll eventually probably watch it. So it could be recording yourself testifying anyway could be really important for later sharing your testimony with others.
I was just about to ask, how, in your experience, Tiana, how effective is it for an average citizen, average resident of the city to um, to share their testimony, to either whether they're doing it live, whether back in the old days, I guess, when we were able to sit in the council, sit during council hearings in the Wilson building. You have people with their phones, they're recording themselves, or they're pointing people to the DC TV video versions of their testimony, and they're sharing it with people back in their neighborhood, back in their wards, back with their families, etc. How important have you seen it resonate with their friends, their families, or encouraging others to do it? If they see Larry sitting in front of a mic talking about, reforming the criminal justice system, or talking about increasing funds for housing services, for housing instability, or homeless services. How impactful is that for others to see and experience that as well?
Yes, that's a great point. It's very empowering, I would say. A lot of our constituent leaders who are in our constituent leadership program, they've shared their experiences when people in their communities actually see them testifying, and kind of that conversation afterwards, and how it motivates the person who watched the testimony, because it's like, wow, if you did it, then I can do it too. And it's also empowering for the person giving the testimony, because you're commanding that attention at that point in time, and people are listening to what you've been through and how that connects to the budget and how there can be better changes. And I think there is it's a mutual respect on both of your times. You respect the council's time, but the council always also respects your time as well. So it's very important, and I would say empowering, because sometimes once you finally make that leap to do so and you appear, in front of the council, I think that that's when you finally kind of realize how impactful and empowering that moment can be.
Right. And it
So
also,
those are kind of some of the stories I've heard. Yeah.
right. And it also uplifts the topic itself, because there could be a lot of people sitting in a neighborhood somewhere around the city that hears someone talking about, how, they were treated by a police officer, or how, their school programs are being underfunded, and they think it's just them, or they think it's just our block or our school. And then you hear someone, on Instagram or social media somewhere, sharing a story towards the council about these inequities, and it kind of, hey, it's not just us, it's not just happening to us in our schools or our neighborhoods. So yeah.
Exactly. It definitely raises awareness and forms a sense of unity. So here is what the FY21 adjusted budget cycle looks like. So this FY21 just means what fiscal year it is, and this is the fiscal year that is planning for next year and this year. So here we have the hearings that are most important for Fair Budget's members and internally our staff. So as you can see, today, I believe, is the 27th, and that is the budget oversight hearing, and that happened at 9 a.m. That is the committee on the whole. And then at the bottom of these calendars, you see the phone numbers and emails that would be important to actually engage with these hearings. And at the top of these calendars, you also see some contacts for who you can communicate. You can communicate with our advocacy manager, Mizuki Valentine, or myself, in order to help craft your testimony and kind of prepare you for any of these hearings that are on the calendar. For me specific, I know that in June, I have some hearings that I'm prepping people for in terms of childcare and making sure that childcare is more affordable and of quality for DC residents. So we will be making sure to attend the Committee on the Whole, which is, I believe, the 16th, and then some health hearings. So there are different hearings for different issues. So June 8th, that is a Monday, that is housing and neighborhood revitalization. So that's really important to a lot of people. So we could help prep people for that. And then again, you can see like the live testimony emails, the phone numbers, and whatnot that would be really helpful for people to get engaged in a timely manner. I would say try to prepare 5 days before each of these hearings so that you can meet the submission deadlines that most of them have. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I would say 5 days is a safe bet to submit your testimony and secure a spot, especially if you want to be live. Okay, and this is a little bit on writing your own testimony. So there are just some few formal markers that you want to make, and that is clearly identifying yourself and the organization you may be with to the council, but also making it clear what your position will be at the beginning of your testimony and what you think needs funding or what you think needs to be focused on or made a priority or invested in. So if there's a bill number, that will be important to reference. And depending on the testimony, it may be good for you to say that you're against or, opposed a certain law that might be being passed soon. And also begin with your personal narrative. It's always great to share as much as you are willing to about your own lived experience and how this connects with the issue that is being discussed at that hearing that day. And then gradually include data and facts. And, there are a bunch of resources that can help you with those. Fair Budget wouldn't be what we are without our members that we collaborate with daily. And one of our members are the DC Fiscal Policy Institute that helps us with a lot of data and figures that we just don't have the time and capacity to calculate ourselves. And then after you put those few things in, you could conclude your testimony, especially because we have a short amount of time. Restate your position and your purpose for testifying, and also you can have a follow-up statement. And of course, just out of courtesy, thanking the committee for their time and that you're open for further questions. I'm not totally sure how the question portion will be for the testimonies in this virtual era, but I know the question part made some people a little bit nervous, but it's best to just answer any question that you may get with, confidence and from your personal experience, and I think you should be fine.
Yeah, that part, I'm glad you brought that part up, especially, well, the last 2 points actually, the restating your position, what your ask is. There are some of us, both, people that work in advocacy and just average residents, interested or passionate about an issue, who are not comfortable just talking about facts, figures, graphs, numbers, charts, etc. But having that personal narrative, how it has impacted your life or the life of your family members or your community, either in a positive or negative way, I think it's hugely important to humanize the issue, and then restating the ask. But the part the questioning, being able to kind of have that moment with the council or the committee chair or committee members, not being able to have that moment where they can look you in the eye, after your 2 or 3 minutes is up speaking, and being able to ask you directly or to thank you for coming directly. I think, do you think will have a huge impact on how um, how impactful those testimonies could be, or do you think it just highlights it, the kind of the disconnect?
I think that's one of the things we have to remind the council when we have the chance, especially on social media or when we're having private meetings with or private group meetings with these council members, is reminding them that this shift will take away some of the kind of natural empathy and moments people share together.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, sorry, my background. I think that should be conveyed at all times to remind them of that, because I don't think that will come instinctively to a lot of them. And I think that's one of the problems that we're seeing, I think, all over the country in the past few years, are how elected officials are constantly remaining accountable to constituents,
Mm-hmm.
and especially mass movements and different campaigns. I think a lot of times elected officials are able to get away without remaining accountable because of the lack of public knowledge and participation in a lot of the processes that we're talking about today, which is not to blame constituents or advocates in any way, because a lot of the council members, they really really want advocates to lift voices and help share voices. But at the same time, if we don't do it, or if we are it's made difficult for us to do it, it's kind of the blame is put back on us. So I think it's two things: testifying, and then also just in any capacity, in any contact you do have with council members, reminding them to remain accountable whether or not someone is there in person. Because I think that some testimonies will have to continue after COVID-19
Mm-hmm.
to be virtual, just so that people who just can't get down to the council or to the Wilson building can still feel heard and appreciated. So it is going to be something that we continue to have conversations around.
Well, hopefully we're all taking notes on this time period, because our city council members, our ANC commissioners, hopefully are learning um, some key tools throughout this of how to communicate. And I think there's one, I'm not going to say the name, but I think there's one person running for council that even offered like having in district offices just to be closer to the neighborhood in which she represents. So I think issues like, I mean, that's something to think about: how we govern, how we communicate, how we connect on both sides, whether we're the person sitting at home wanting to have our voice heard, wanting our day at the hearing, like we know a lot of people actually enjoy doing during these council hearings. When that's taken away, how is that substitute, or how can we guarantee that process continues to exist even when the conditions aren't set up for it?
Right. And I think that we also just don't want to take lightly or underestimate that people still are facing drastic implications because of COVID-19, which might hinder their ability to testify and communicate on their own behalf. So hopefully that is taken into account too during this time, and that, if there's any kind of lack of participation, especially from constituents, that we are noticing that people are losing their jobs at high unprecedented rates, and people are fighting off a virus, whether it's personally or they may know someone who is. So I think that's also really important for the council to keep in mind
And,
as they
and for us to
remain
be
accountable.
and for us to be reminding them that, because sometimes
Yeah.
they tend to forget these things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then next is a little bit more for your testimony. So you could literally write out good morning, your name is, and what you may be a member of. You might not be a member of the Fair Budget Coalition, but you might be a member of something in your community, or different types of rights associations. I know there are a lot of tenant rights associations that you may be speaking on behalf of. So all those things are great to include you're a member of, or just say that you're an individual that cares about this issue, and thank you for this opportunity to testify. And then you could include something like, I strongly support the Fair Budget Coalition's FY21 budget values. These values and policy recommendations and funding requests are designed for and by Washingtonians who passionately want to address racial inequities throughout the DC budget. And then here is something more current. With Black residents making up an overwhelming number of COVID deaths, we know that there is no excuse for neglecting Black and Brown communities through chronic and historical disinvestments and displacement. So these are all important things that you can pop in throughout your testimony. And then lastly, this relates to an earlier campaign that Fair Budget launched that we have been adjusting due to COVID-19, but we had a line that said, "So often we hear people, visitors, and new residents and officials say we love the city, but if you really love the city, you should invest in a just recovery." And just recovery is a new hashtag that we have been adapting throughout budget season in order for residents and council members to follow along on what different members of DC organizations want to see in the recovery of DC during this time. And then you go into what your testimony would focus on. So these are just some more outlines you could have.
One thing I would add as kind of a layer to your introduction is, depending on which committee you're speaking to, know who the committee members are. Especially if one of the committee members, council members is in your ward, state that. State you live in Ward 7, you live in Ward 2, whatever, especially drawing that connection to the person that represents your ward, just to kind of give a more direct contact, and almost like you're putting them on the clock. You know, obviously, if you're going to be giving testimony, generally, for the most part, people are DC residents. But if your council member, it happens to be on that board, on that committee, and is in, well, even if they're there or not, because it'll be done for the record. But you're almost calling them out, and you're kind of speaking directly to them as well as the entire council and committee.
Yes, thank you for making that point. And then here are some effective and proven advocacy strategies. So one thing is to organize others and be the leader if needed. So there are many community leaders spread across DC, but this is always your opportunity to become one if you're not one already, and tell your story. And then you can connect others. If you know that you have a friend who has a story that is just as compelling as yours, or might fit a certain topic that you've seen listed in the calendar, you know, tap them and help them work on their testimony, and then just provide that encouragement for them to also share their testimony. And then there are other materials that you might see floating around on the internet and social media: fact sheets, blogs, or reports, sign-on letters. All of these things, op-eds, all of these things that you see are being used to educate and persuade, and even educate and persuade you, but mostly it's targeted toward the council and different council members. So those could be things that you read and get information on. And a lot of them that I read personally are pretty much well written and can be consumed by pretty much any reader. But again, we could reference you on your journey of writing your testimony, some fact sheets and blogs that might be really useful.
Now, Tiana, obviously during the COVID-19 pandemic, public distancing, social distancing, everything has changed. So being able to just walk up to any of these council members' offices, it's not possible at the moment. Is there any of these examples you would give as like what's best now until things clear up, the air clears up, so to speak?
Right. So right now, one of the starting points is talking virtually and communicating virtually, but also there have been some really impactful movements of car campaigns. So people get in their car, they drive by council buildings, and they honk really loud. They'll have posters in their windows or outside of their windows, social distancing, but making themselves loud and heard in an organized effort. You could always do it by yourself, but I'm pretty sure you could find other organizations that are coordinating kind of car movements. And I've seen even some council members have cars and people on bikes kind of rallying for re-election. So people are getting really creative in ways you can social distance, but still show up and kind of be loud about something that you care about. And you won't have those hallway interactions with policymakers anytime soon, but you can still find ways to connect with organizations that do have meetings with these individuals. And then I would say that's, still pretty intimate to make sure that that council member is hearing your voice in a smaller meeting. So those are some of the ways I would think. And of course, tweet storms on social media, using similar hashtags, adding public officials. That's a great way, along with everything that I mentioned. So it's basically going to be a combined effect. And a lot of it is going to be done social distancing now.
Got it.
Yes. And also something to kind of hone in on, that the money is found when needed. So a lot of policymakers might lead you to believe that there isn't the funding for something you believe in, but a lot of times that money is there. And when we put pressure on them and show them that is a priority, that money appears. And as we showed before, there are pots of money in reserves, there are money coming from the federal government, and then there is money because DC overall has a pretty big budget. We didn't mention that the budget before this year, I think, totaled around $15 billion. So now we're projected at spending about $8 billion. So that's a lot of money going a lot of places that could be moved around to programs that benefit racial justice and a lot of the stories that you all will be sharing. So yeah, so that's pretty much it, and understanding the city's finances. And lastly is kind of how to get involved. If you want to become a Fair Budget member, here is the link, and that is found on our website. You can sign up for our newsletters and our issue groups, where we talk more specifically about everything that I mentioned, specifically back on the first slide. All the social justice issues we have there have a issue group to match. And then I'd be happy to schedule a virtual coffee with any of you, and our team members will be happy to have any, virtual one-on-ones with any of you who are also interested. So these are a few ways to get involved. If any of this sounded or made you feel a little anxious about getting started, it could all be started pretty quickly with a virtual coffee or reading one of our newsletters.
Well, that's great. Like we said at the top, traditionally public participation with government entities, usually mean voting, or if you're lucky enough to run for office, or being involved with a political campaign, attending hearings. Some of us just read paper every day and try to stay up to date. Another layer of that involvement is just being able to engage directly with the budget process, get to know what's in the budget, how it impacts you, how it impacts your community. Thank you, Tiana, for putting all this together. Thank you to Fair Budget and the staff for creating all these tools for the members and for residents of the city.
No problem. Thanks for having me and collaborating with me to, get this, presentation out to more people.
And you have, I know that Fair Budget is planning I guess a few more kind of video webinar tutorials that are wrapped around kind of budget and budget priorities.
Yes, we want to make sure to go more in depth, of course, on some of the budget figures that were mentioned previously, and kind of some shorter videos that will appear on our YouTube channel, and kind of give people more ideas on what budget engagement can look like and what it looked like in the past.
Great. Well, we definitely look forward to seeing it. Again, thank you, Tiana, for collaborating with us. And for all of you, we will stay in touch. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Again, I'm Larry Bryant, Community Engagement Manager. I told you I would forget myself and my title at some point. Community Engagement Manager for the ACLU DC, and we will see you next time. Thank you for watching.